talking all about creating a design language with Tailwind CSS. Now, Tailwind has been on my radar for a while as one of those things like, I should probably figure out what that is, because everyone's getting quite excited about it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this. Please give a big hand, James Bender.
So yeah, you can probably tell by listening, I'm not from here. I am from America. I'm here now. I've been speaking for quite a while, mostly in America, but now I'm here. I work for a company in America, but I run the application services practice there. Full disclosure, nobody has anything they can throw at me, right? Okay, great. I don't really identify as a .NET developer anymore. I've been doing mostly React and JavaScript for the past long time, years. I'm not giving you a number. But I was shocked the other day when I tried to fire up Visual Studio, and I was like that Gandalf, like, I have no memory of this. And so the code example I'm going to show you today is in React. Having said that, there's nothing in the code that I'm going to show you that won't work in C#, VB, ASP.NET, whatever the crazy .NET kids are doing these days. The installation is a little trickier. I'm not going to cover that as well. I will make the deck available. Or Blazor. Is anybody doing Blazor? Okay, I see a lot of this. So I got bad news for you. I don't think Blazor's going to make it. And the only reason I say that is because I have a friend named Ed. And Ed was a big fan of Lightswitch and the other key something. Ed has never picked a winning technology in the entire time I've met him. So Blazor could be the coolest thing in the world, but Ed's like, Blazor's awesome. I'm going to totally get behind this. Dead. So out there. Having said that, there's separate sets of instructions for each. Okay, now that I've denigrated .NET enough, we can move on. Okay, there we go. I guess I'm going to have to do this the hard way. Hi, like I said, I'm James. I'm a software developer. It doesn't really make much sense for the... Sorry. So as a software developer, there are things I'm good at, and there's things I'm not so good at. I'm great at writing code. I'm great at sort of things. What I'm not great at is making things that look pretty. And we've all built this, right? The standard gray, forms over data, not the prettiest thing in the world. And for a while, this is all we had, right? This is all we could build because we just didn't have anything. But we've kind of gotten to a point, especially now with things like the internet and the web and everything else, this just doesn't kind of cut it anymore. It's not enough to make something that's functional. We have to make something that's designed well. And again, I know, Steve Jobs, sorry. He makes a good point here. It's not just how it looks. Design influences how they're going to use it. I mean, think of the iPhone versus the Windows Phone that came before it, or even the BlackBerry. Those were interfaces where people were kind of trying to replicate what was on the desktop. They weren't really embracing the form factor of the phone. Apple started with the design for iOS, and then that kind of influenced how it works, and it created a better analogy or user interface for that works. On the other hand, Steve also had some issues. And it was important to kind of get this idea of software should be attractive. He might have said that, I don't know. It sounds like. It should be attractive. It should be appealing to the eye. If you have a choice between applications, one looks like it's going to be painful to use, one looks like it's going to be fun, interesting, pleasant. You're going to go with the one that's pleasant, right? Most of us are, all things being equal. So we end up with a lot of things like this, like component libraries, which are a little more prescriptive. And I apologize, that picture is very small on this page, but you've seen this all before. We have these libraries of components that we get that show us how to lay these out. And these have been helpful. They've helped us standardize on a way to do look and feel, do behavior, things like that. How many of you work in a company or on a project where you have a dedicated designer? Have you ever? I'll throw that out a little wider. Okay. So if you've worked with a designer, you've probably seen something like this. Some kind of prescriptive guide as to how your application should look. Colors, fonts, spacing. The idea is to create a consistent interface. That's going to provide a couple things. It does seem like a lot of work, so why should we care, right? I was at a point years ago, where I was struggling with CSS, oddly enough, and I found that, well, screw this. We're just going to give everybody Fiddler It was Postman and Excel, and they can figure it out on their own. That was my half-joking plan. Screw them, do that. The problem is that doesn't work for a couple reasons. For one thing, especially if you're a public-facing application, branding is important. How many of you, I mean, Trainline's a great example. Trainline's got a very specific brand. If you go to their website, their mobile app, you know it's Trainline right away. The color, the font, the logo, everything. If you work on a public-facing website, anyone, okay, a couple, I'm sure you get beaten over the head constantly about this needs to fit our brand. We have a specific way of doing things. I have half of my clients are internal apps right now, half of them are external. One of them is oddly enough a public utility, which you'd think, why do they care? I mean, in the US, it's a little different. Your utility is based on where you live, so it's not like they have to compete. But we used the slightly wrong shade of red, and it was a giant firestorm. It's like, okay, whatever. But we also want to make things that are pleasant to use. This is probably already all seen before. Back in the days when front page and GeoCities ruled the landscape. This looks like it was designed by a 13-year-old. I put them in everything. And it was just kind of thrown together. This clearly is not a professional-looking website. And that your company is going to be kind of judged on that, right? How does a website look? If you can have the greatest app in the world, but if your website's clunky, difficult to use, I tried buying, I think it was something, tickets, yeah, it's okay. It was tickets for a concert. And the venue was selling them themselves. They didn't go through one of the dice or whatever. But their website was so terrible. It took me 40 minutes to book these stupid concert tickets to the point where I was almost like, I don't even want to go anymore. This is dumb. So we want to make sure that part of that functionality is building something in that helps the user. Basically did a census, or not a census, they did an assessment of all the US government websites a couple of years ago. And they found out that there was clearly no combined or common design language, right? You have 3 different login buttons on there. You have a couple different submits. These were scattered all over. And yeah, they might be for different departments, but when you go to the US government website, you expect that, you're not thinking, well, okay, but Department of Education does this and Department of Energy does this. You're just thinking, okay, this, if it was a company, you'd just be like, why is Amazon's website all screwy? Why is everything different? And it makes it tougher for developers because when developers don't have, we're great at writing code, but when we don't have a prescriptive way of how do you want this to look? We've all been in the project, build this page, okay, how do you want it to look? One of the first things we ask, right? Especially when we don't have like a wireframe or a style guide. What should this thing look like? So one of the first things we ask. If we don't have a clear vision or clear description, it's harder for us, right? We have to, okay, what should this button look like? Where should it go? Should it be green? Should it be blue? All those questions we have to solve. And I guarantee no matter what you decide, someone's going to say, well, that's not what we wanted. Why'd you do that? It's like, well, you didn't give me any answer. And in the absence of any answers, I made up my own answers. So there you go. So one of the things we tried to do with this was come up with some of these frameworks. And I'm using framework very loosely. Some of these are frameworks, some of these are libraries. They're just stuff. So there you go. Is anybody... one that came along. Twitter put it out, and at the time, Bootstrap was amazing. Bootstrap solved a lot of problems. As a developer who's CSS challenged, Bootstrap made my life a lot easier, or I thought it did. It turns out I was trading one problem for another. Bootstrap is very opinionated. It ships with some components, it ships with buttons, it ships with tables, it ships with a variety of things. And those are all great until you want something different. Then it becomes a problem. Before Bootstrap, how many of you go back far enough to remember table hell or table layout hell? Yeah, okay. I tried this flow tag. Man, I tried it for like 5 minutes and I couldn't figure it out, so I just made it a table. And then I love tables, so I put a table inside a table, which was already in a table and was next to a table and had a table underneath it, right? Because tables are clearly designed for layout. Well, no, they're not. Bootstrap solved that problem. Instead of tables, we had columns and rows, which are totally different from rows and headers, right? And cells. I mean, they're not even close to being the same thing. Why would you think that? Silly developer. We ended up trading one problem for another one. And if you've gone into a Bootstrap website, especially one where you have people who are like, well, it needs to be one pixel to the left, or one half a hair down, or whatever. Betting table, you see column, row, column, row, column, row, and we just traded one problem for another. Now, this did help a little bit with things like ARIA and screen readers and things like that, because table is a semantic tag. The expectation is just tabular data. Column and grid is, the screen is like, well, whatever, hey, you do you. So it helped with that in that regard, but it didn't help us. It didn't make us better developers, because instead of learning how to actually do CSS, we just said, okay, well, instead of a table, it's going to be a row. Boom, done. And also, we got another problem with designers. If you notice, you could probably go to almost any website right now and tell within, I'd say, 15 to 20% error whether that site uses Bootstrap or not. Why is that? Sorry? That's yes. But a bigger issue is, he said rounded corners on buttons. I'm going to also say gel buttons, because for some reason those are the rage in the 2000s. Everything had to be a gel button. They all look kind of the same, right? And the reason is because, again, Bootstrap's very opinionated. And it came from Twitter, and Twitter wasn't about, hey, Twitter's attitude when they released it was just, hey, this is what we use, we're putting it out there, use it, don't use it, we don't care. Right? It's open source, it's free, all your complaints can be directed to that brick wall. Which was fine, and again, it was a step forward, but it was just a step, and it didn't really please the designers, because again, we got into a lot of situations where the designer's like, well, that's close, but it's not what I wanted. And developers, and this was our attitude for a long time, come on, it's close enough. 80-20, right? 80-20 problem. Just, you keep saying 80-20 often enough, and eventually it starts to make sense, and they just get tired, and they go away and leave you alone. But the problem is that doesn't actually happen. And we, as developers, kind of got this attitude that, ugh, designers, am I right? Which is the wrong attitude. I have learned over the past several years, a good designer is worth their weight in gold. They will create a site, a vision for you, so you don't have to think about it, you just build it. But at the same time, a good designer is also a giant pain in the butt, because there is no detail so small that they will not notice it. I mentioned the red color earlier. I mean, if you'd have done the old Pepsi challenge thing, show me both websites, they will notice everything and they will make you fix it, which is fine. I mean, again, if we're doing public sites, that's important. So we needed to move away from I have Bulma on here. Who's used Bulma? Yeah, that's not a huge shock. I know one person who's used it, and she said, you got to put Bulma. Honestly, if you Google it, it might say result not found. But she insisted, and I was like, okay, fine, if I put it on there, leave me alone. Yes. Okay, done. I used to be married. And then we have Material UI. Who's here? Most of us have probably crossed horns with Material UI at one point or another. Material UI is another one. My relationship's slightly less complicated in that I don't like it at all. So I guess it's not really all that UI. And every so often when we hire a new person and we put them on a project, like, so I know you didn't put Material UI on the stack list. I'm like, yes. Well, did you just miss it? No. There's a very distinct reason. If you install Material UI on this project, you'll be fired. I'm not going to fire them, but I'm going to torture them a little bit. They'll be punished in the traditional manner. Material UI is another one of those. It's a very opinionated framework, and if you like its opinions, great. The problem is you get into the kind of that bootstrap thing, where you have all, it's got its own opinions around the layouts, where you have to do cards and these areas and sections. And again, it's just, if I'm drinking your Kool-Aid, that's fine. But the second I want to do something else, it is a major hassle. So again, not a fan of Material UI. And there's always at least 1 or 2 Material UI fans who are like, well, but it's the, no, sorry, you're not going to convince me. Thought I heard you say something. Okay.
I mean, I was thinking jQuery UI, but I didn't say it.
Oh my God. That was back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, and I think we burned dung for fuel and Material. Oh God, is that still? Actually, I just read somewhere there's a OS coming out based on jQuery. I'm like, why do you hate people? Why? Just why? Someone was really, now okay, if that had come out during the pandemic, okay, you're home, you're bored, I get it. In 2024, I don't understand that, but anyway, that's a
Quick show of hands. Is anyone here still using jQuery on sites?
Well, let me rephrase that. Is anybody using jQuery for new development? You'd be surprised. jQuery is the COBOL of the web. You'd be surprised how much of it's still out there, still needs to be maintained. I mean, there's who remembers Angular 1, the old MVC? We still get clients with that. Some of you who were at last month's meeting, you might have heard me say this. I had a client reach out to me about 6 months ago, like, hey, we're looking for Cold Fusion developers. I'm like, yeah, well, let me know how that works out for you.
I have worked on it. It's painful.
It's like, yeah.
I've never heard of Cold Fusion.
Don't look it up. You will not. It will not make you happy.
Official website's link is broken on Google, so I don't think anyone can look up.
Even Google's like, nope, never heard of it. Sorry, move on. Apparently all the developers are in witness protection, rightfully so, or won't cop to it. I was at a conference years ago. My shame, I used to do Power Builder. I was young, I needed the money. And I had someone at the conference say, hey, I remember you used to do Power Builder. I'm like, shut up. Don't say that. You don't want that getting out, right? Where were we again? Oh, that's right. Tailwind, okay. Hey, we got to fill time. I'm only a speaker tonight, so what are you going to do? So this brings us into kind of so I talked about the design language. So how do we realize that? And we're going to talk about Tailwind in a minute and about building kind of a more pragmatic design language for it. But the other thing we kind of have to look at is how we as developers have been writing software, particularly websites. Now, again, as I mentioned, I'm primarily a React programmer. See, I have a MacBook now, and my brain's been replaced with porridge or whatever Dylan will say it has been. But, and I have inherited several .NET C# programmers, who I am kind of banging into shape as React developers. And they're smart guys, but they write a lot of what I call C# and JavaScript. One of the things React does, and I guess Angular does too, or I haven't played with Angular forever, but it makes you think of things in terms of components. And I know you have those in ASP.NET. They were called, I believe, user controls last time I looked. Is that not the name anymore?
Okay. No, we've got all new stuff now.
Okay.
We got Razor components.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, Razor. And then Maui and
yeah.
Okay.
We'll have a Razor component session later this year because they're actually quite cool.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, hey, awesome.
Yeah.
But it's the idea of the component-based architecture, right? Web components, they were the kind of the grandfather, but I heard, no. Nobody uses them. They're like, yeah, that's cool, but this is actually a framework, so I'm going to go use that instead. But this idea of kind of moving from the smaller atomic to the larger, this idea of composable web applications, composable web pages. And one of the things I'm trying to get across to these guys right now is start with the smallest thing. Make that a component. Well, we're going to have a bunch of components. Yes, that's the point. I would rather have a dozen tiny little, we have components that are 6 lines long, but they get used everywhere in our application. And that 6 lines is A, cool, we don't have to write a couple hundred times, and B, if we need to make a change, we change it one place, and C, I am the big unit test guy, I will not apologize for that. We have to write one set of unit tests. In addition to all that, because the traditional things we think about, the functionality, the testing, all the things that go along with it, we can also bake in this design language. And the example up here, hopefully you guys can see this, it's a little small, but we have these buttons up here which are all defined as components. We have the bell component and the white squarish thing component and the thing that looks like a thought bubble component. If you get a decent picture of that, I will be super impressed, because that is, I was 2 feet away and I could barely see it. Oh my, Here's the liaison I'll give. Sorry, dumb Dune joke. Anyway, but we factor in now these look and feels into these components. So when they go to use or this button or this field or the whatever in the other places in the app as we go, we get that consistent look and feel. That travels with the component. And again, smaller components are also easier to manage. They're easier to fix. If you have 20 lines of code versus 4 lines of code, every line of code you write is another potential bug. So lots of small ones makes it a lot easier. And again, we carry that design language forward into our components as we build things out for sake of consistency. So this brings us to Tailwind. Before we dig into this, are there any questions on what we've talked about so far? No? You're all still awake, right? Okay. You didn't drug the pizza this time. You drugged one of the pizzas.
You got to pay extra for drug pizza.
One of the pizzas was drugged. We're not going to tell you which one.
No, those were just mushrooms.
Oh, that explains a whole lot right now. It's crazy. I was giving this talk. I don't know what was going on. So Tailwind CSS. Okay, we finally get into it. What is Tailwind CSS? Tailwind, people call it a framework, people call it a library. It's kind of neither fish nor fowl. It is basically a set of CSS utility classes. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over the classes here because the fact of the matter is you can either learn Tailwind in 5 minutes or 4 hours. There's really no in between. You're either going to learn the basics or you're going to deep dive into it. The deep dive is kind of pointless in my opinion because you're going to use the same dozen classes over and over again anyway, right? And if you, like, I had to do an animation a couple days ago and I'm like, I don't remember how to do that. I looked it up. 5 minutes later, done. Or you can use that newfangled chat GPT and do it that way. It's up to you, I don't care. ChatGPT is actually pretty good with Tailwind, so if you do get really stuck, ChatGPT will be like, okay, here's what you did wrong, and it'll fix it for you. So hopefully you can read all of this. It's a little small, but basically what Tailwind does is it ships what are called utility classes. Now, what these are basically small little micro CSS classes. And hopefully you can read this, but I'll kind of 24 with 24 relative. Okay. H24, what does H probably stand for? Height. Great. 24. Now, one of the things I will say when I get into this is Tailwind will kind of give you these measurement units. You'll see like H24, text. Tailwind is very good about handling responsiveness. So if you're trying to build a mobile website, or even we have a couple React Native applications, and who here, I don't know if anybody's here done React Native, but we're using Tailwind in those because it just handles the responsiveness better than what ships with React Native, which is a framework I like to call hot garbage, but I think it's got a different name. But it handles those very well if you kind of stay within Tailwind's sizing things. Now that doesn't mean, and now I just shit all over Bootstrap because it doesn't let you change things. You can change it and make it more specific with Tailwind, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you stick to the prescribed spacing and sizing, when you go to be responsive, it's pretty much just done. You don't have to worry about it. And you can put checkpoints in there for everything. So height 24, width 24, relative. Anyone want to guess what that is? I know we're not CSS people, are we? Okay. So yes, you can't answer all of them. You gotta. Okay, so getting down here, MB2. Okay, so anything with M is going to be margin. In this case, MB margin bottom, MT margin top. It kind of just, after you've done it for a little bit, so I'm not going to get too much into it. We'll do a code demo where I'll show you some of this stuff. But once you get into it, it gets very easy to kind of remember these classes. Because again, you're only going to use the same 10 or 12. Rounded full. How many of you have done rounded corners in CSS? How many of you liked doing it? Liar. Why must you turn my talk into a den of lies?
The reason I like doing it is because I did it before CSS could do it.
Okay, that's okay. Now, okay.
Doing 9 slice images in Fireworks.
Okay, so the bragging is awesome. Okay, I'll give you credit for that. That's fine.
It got a lot better.
Oh yeah. Well, it got worse than it got better. I mean, so rounded. I added that to this thing, and it just rounded it for me. It was like magic. Like, witchcraft, burn it. Some of these other ones, text. If I want to change the size of text, I have text XL. I have text left. Put it on the left side. MT, margin top. And we'll go through some of these in here, but you can see even like background. I have a color in here called slate. I set my background to slate, done. And I set all these kind of on this individual line. You can see down here, hopefully you can see this. If not, I'll try to show you in the code. But I mentioned a few minutes ago this idea of the sizing in Tailwind and kind of keeping it as much as possible because it helps responsiveness. If I do need to change something different or I need to use something that's not in there, I can do W 100%. Now, I wrote this but you could do 100%. You can do, in this case, I have width 390 pixels. So you have that opportunity. All it's just is W dash and then square brackets and then whatever value you want. You can do pixels, rems, whatever crazy measurement you want. Metric yards, I don't know. Whatever it supports in the browser. Flex. How many of you here, again, we have flex layout, we have grid layout. How many of you can honestly explain the difference between the two and which one to use? And okay, yeah. It's a mystery to me too. I asked ChatGPT, hey, what should I use here? Well, clearly that's a flex layout. Oh, clearly, yes, I agree. I was just checking you. Flex call, done. If that is like 5 or 6 lines of CSS I don't have to write. Or more importantly, I don't have to write incorrectly. So that is what kind of now, one thing, and this is a fair criticism I will see from people, is this is a lot of things I have to do. Why wouldn't I just write my own classes? I'm sure you've all been on classes like, or projects before where you write your own CSS classes, right? Well, this will be great, we'll plan this out, we'll actually do it right, we'll define all these CSS classes, and then we'll use them and we'll be consistent throughout the blah, blah, blah. End up 3 months later with body 1, body 1.2, body A. And you have all these classes at A, well, we need to change this one little thing, and we don't want to, so we changed it, but then it broke everybody else, so we just made a copy of that class, we changed the name, and now we just use it here. You end up with just this giant CSS file, half of which probably isn't even being used, but has to be maintained, and you never really get that consistency across the board. Instead, you just get a jumble of CSS, and then you have the issue is, okay, well, we had an issue, we had to change file because this class was underneath this class, so we had to move it up because it was superseding this one, but then there's this other one of this other file this other department made, and then that was kind of intruding. It becomes a disaster, right? We've all been on projects like that, right? Yes, we have. Yes, okay, great. This solves that problem. My CSS class, every project I have right now with the Tailwind, I'll see if I want to show you. Our global CSS class has 3 lines at the top. There are Tailwind imports. Now, we could stop there, and we usually do. We are using a visual component framework called SHAD-CN, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. That adds some boilerplate to it when we install it, but the great thing is, I don't know what any of this stuff does, but I don't have to. It's not mine, it belongs to SHAD-CN. As long as I don't touch it, everything's cool. So that's kind of what Tailwind is. Now, again, Tailwind is a large collection of these. One of the things I also get asked is, well, this is great, but does it ship with all these? When you build your application, and this happens in .NET too, there's a process where Tailwind will do what's called tree shaking. Is anybody tree shaking? Everybody? Okay. So you're only going to end up shipping the styles you actually use in your application. You're not going to ship the whole library. But we're trying to build a design language, right? So I'm going to show you how to do that, which even kind of narrows that down a little bit more, because sometimes the tree shaking misses a couple things. So we're going to kind of dive into that. And we're going to do a little bit of demo. Now this is a little bit abbreviated. Normally this is like an hour and a half long talk. I did cut it short, so we're going to kind of, not going to race through it, but it's going to be a little bit on the shorter side. But we're going to build this, right? It's a pretty simple component. Now granted, this is a user group talk. It's a contrived demo. It is what it is. But we're going to build this little kind of card component where we have this rounded image and a person's name and a title. And the title is going to be like a nice little kind of rounded pill thing with a different color font, clearly done by a very professional designer who knows about colors and contrast and things like that, and not just some guy who gives talks who after like 5 beers. They were American beers though, so they weren't even that. Okay, so this is what we're going to build. So let's take a look at some code here. Now again, this is in React. It's not rocket science. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll do my best to explain it. Everything I'm going to show you will work in .NET exactly the same way, so there's not going to be an issue there. I'm using Visual Studio Code. So this is, again, just my app. Now we only have, I want to show you guys, again, what we're building. So, okay, so this is what we delivered. Do I need to zoom in, or is that good for everyone? Okay. If you're in the back, you can actually turn around. There's a screen behind you. I don't know if that helps, but that's what I've been looking at the whole time. So this is, okay, so this is what we built, because we're the smart team, right? We're the team that does everything right. But we had this other component, we needed 3 other teams to build the same component and deliver it. And we gave them a style guide, and we gave them a list of things we wanted it to do, and we gave them a description. So let's integrate their changes and see what it looks like. I'm sure it's going to be perfect, right? Well, no. Oh, I do need internet access, it turns out. Here, I'll just use my phone. It's fine. Or no, I won't. Okay. Let me try that one more time here. I forgot that these images come off the internet. Crazy, but okay.
It might catch on, you know.
I don't know. Al Gore has been working on it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we have 3 or 4 components that all kind of look the same. These people, okay, so everybody's got the rounded image, which is good. That was done. We have a couple things going on here. It looks like this person thought this was bolded, and I don't know what they were thinking with this dark background. That's clearly not what we wanted. This person was pretty close, but again, their font's a little bit off. I don't know what this team was thinking. We never said a background, and we never said, definitely have your background be larger than your CSS element. I spend a lot of time trying to make that not happen in my code. I don't know how they did that. But, so we have these 4 different things. So this is where we get into this idea of kind of using Tailwind to create a style image. And let me just kind of run through some of these real quick so I can show you some of the code that's in here. So we'll go upper right. This is the one that's correct. And so what I've done here again is we have just divs, and I have this card component, which is just I threw in here as just a way to kind of lay things out. But even in here, I have my flex column. So what this allows me to do is in this card, I have deployed a component which handles my layout for everything that's going to be in it. So this is a way of, again, creating a component, because this component really doesn't do anything else, right? I'm feeding in a list of children, which is just other elements, and I'm just spitting them back out. All this does is it handles my layout. But again, this is a component that's useful to me because I know I'm going to have a consistent layout everywhere I use this. And again, getting back, now I believe this plugin does exist for Visual Studio, but in VS Code, I have a plugin where I can actually hover over these, and it'll give me what the equivalent, can you read that? Okay. It'll give me what the equivalent CSS is for each one of these. In case I can see a width of 64 is a width 16 rem. So I can always kind of hover over these and see what they're doing. If I have any doubt or if I have any concerns, I can sit here. For me, it's mostly something I go, oh yes, flex column direction. Yes, of course, that's correct. I don't know what this means. Item center. How many of you remember tried to center things in divs in CSS before with float? Not fun. So PY, padding, anything that starts with P is a padding, and then I can set a direction. If I just do P-10, for example, if I change this, just do P10, we can see that changed our layout a little bit. But if I do PY, what that's saying is do a padding on the Y-axis, so top and bottom, 10. I could do, and you can see these look kind of back to normal. If I did a PX, it would change the padding to X-axis. I can also do T for top, B for bottom, R for right, L for left. Again, throw a bunch of class names at you because you're not going to remember them, and B, once you learn them, they're pretty easy to use. And again, I'll make this code demo available too. It's once you kind of filter all the JavaScript out in your brain, it's just HTML. Yeah.
Is there precedence on the ordering of classes?
Is there precedence on your classes?
And you've got P at the end.
So yes. So yes and no. Order matters if you have the two that is, if I had a PX, what did I have this initially? a PY. If I had another PY over here, 5, it's going to take the last one if that PY is the same. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to apply padding Y to all of them, but this is the more specialized one. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the more specialized one over the least specialized one, if that makes sense. Just a P says apply to everything, so it's going to be less specialized. PY is going to say, okay, that's more specialized, so we're going to apply that after the P1. And then if I did padding top, okay, that's even more specialized, so that's going to go above it. Does that make sense? Okay. Good question, because in CSS, order does matter. Sometimes you need to find these rules. So, okay. So getting back to this here, you can see I've basically just used my CSS class here to find things. We have our picture coming in. This is how I got my round. I didn't have to think about that. My object cover, so I make sure that I'm actually cutting that picture out. And again, you'll be able to look at these. The way out of the box that Tailwind handles colors is it'll be text, background, whatever you want to change, dash, and then the color name. In this case, I went with blue 900. And the way it works is, let me see if I can, I don't know if it's going to apply to this one. Okay, if I do, get out of the way, IntelliSense. If I do BG, and this is another plugin I have, it does exist for Visual Studio where it'll kind of do the IntelliSense on the colors for you. If I did BG, let's say red, because I think it'll show up a little bit better. I can see that these are the 10 out of the box. I think I defined it 950 somewhere and forgot about it. But these are the 10 red shades out of the box that Tailwind gives me. Now, I can go in and I can change any of these if they're not quite what I want, but these were picked sort of for a reason. If you look at a lot of things like color theory that designers look at, they kind of divide the color spectrum into 10 things. But that division from completely almost white to completely dark red is not necessarily linear, right? You mentioned how many of you play music at all? Okay, so we have 12 tones in Western music, but most scales are 7-note scales. They're not divided symmetrically. And what that means, and the way it translates here is, we may have this color palette from here to here. There's actually science behind this that shows the ones that are more effective in terms of human interaction. And so that's kind of what Tailwind has shipped with, is that idea of color theory to pick the ones that are most used. Now, having said that, that's not always the case. And again, I apparently at some point, I forgot I did this, I defined a 950, which is so red it's almost black. I would argue that's not, unless I'm building a website for either bricks or barbecue meat, I don't know if that's particularly helpful. But this red 900 here, and I usually have okay, there it goes. This is, let me see if I can do this. It's not going to zoom in. But this red is a little on the darker side, but that is kind of more in what humans are looking at, or what will catch their eye. So I have all these different colors I can use, and that's how I assign them, is I do whatever I want to change, dash color, dash whatever shade. And here I have inline block. This is a lot of the positional stuff, which traditionally is where most developers struggle with CSS, is getting it to do positional stuff, right? It started with float, and we hated it, and it was terrible, so we just kind of stopped paying attention. Even though all the cool stuff like grid layout and flex layout came after it. We were like, no, I'm still pissed about float, so I'm not going to bother. But it's gotten better, and things like inline block and flex have kind of helped us with that. The upper left person, theirs wasn't too bad. They did a couple things here. They have a different font for John Doe. But the one that really was the issue was the lower right, I believe. Yeah, this person had a background in here of gray. They put it on the top div, so of course it overlaps everything else. A couple of other issues. So that's how we get to this. So we're going to do a couple steps. Now, I've cut a few steps out of this because, again, I thought I was sharing with someone else, and I'm not. But anyway, we're going to do a few steps to kind of help us with this. And now I talked about, well, here's where it starts to finally pay off. When you set up Tailwind, you're going to get this TS config file, or sorry, Tailwind config file. TS is TypeScript. I know, Buchis. And this is going to have a couple things in it that I can change. Now, there's two sections that we're going to really care about most. I'm going to talk about extend first. Underneath theme, I can create this object called extend. And the schema for this is, I mean, if you have the plugins installed, Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, they'll spit it out for you. They don't tell since it's so it's really hard to screw up. But under this extend, I can define a few things. For example, I can define various colors. A lot of times I'll want to define specific colors. For example, gray is a great example. If you go, well, let's start at the top. Sometimes we want to define colors to be names of things. Primary. We have a primary color, we have a secondary color. In this case, we have a success color, we have a danger color. We use those quite a bit because, again, we want to give a message when a record saves. And if it's great, hey, success color, we don't have to think about that. Right now, that happens to be green. If we have a client that says, no, I don't like that, make it blue, go in here, change it, it's done. Same with danger. Now, and again, this is just an example. I had the hash version in here, but this is just to demonstrate that Tailwind does support RGB as well. It supports HSL, I think. I've never seen anybody use it, but if that's your thing, yeah, YOLO, I guess. I don't know. They're colors. There's a million ways to describe them, and they're all just. So I can define specific colors in here. So when we get to the fixed components, you'll see what that looks like. The one thing I do want to show you in here is gray. Now, if we went back to the web page here, where I've gone ahead and implemented, we can see right away this background gray is gone. Remember, we had that overlapping. In fact, I'll just comment that out. You can see it again. Yeah, it's back. So what we've done here is by redefining gray, what we have told Tailwind is, oops, lower right, yep. No, wait, I want lower right. There we go. What we told gray, if you remember when we were on here initially, if I hover this, I don't get anything. I don't get the little colored block here showing me this is what your color is, the preview. What I've told Tailwind here is, hey, I want to redefine gray. I don't want to use your palette anymore. I want gray to be this and that's it. Block everything else out. I can't, if I change this to slate, for example, gray and slate, very different colors. And I came back over here, that might be too bright. Okay, but you can see. Okay, well, slate's still fine. You didn't say I couldn't use slate. Gotcha. But when I made it gray, it basically essentially said, yeah, gray 200 is not a valid color anymore. Now, if you want to just make it gray, you can do that. But it controls how you're doing things. So again, we had the 10 suggested pigments for every color that Tailwind provides. We can override that and say, no, we just want you to use this. Or we can do what we've done, blue. Now, blue is a little different. We have a default and a dark and a light. But you'll notice over here, is this the right one? Lower right, that's one I want. Okay, you'll notice here, oh, my little previews went away. Sometimes it works, sometimes they don't. But if I go back to the page, we can see, okay, well, it's still doing all these different blues. What the extend does is it basically just adds things to your Tailwind. It doesn't, it's additive, it's not subtractive. So if I come back here to Tailwind, I can see, okay, I wanted to define blue, but I want to add these values, a default value, a dark, and a light. So again, I still have this text blue 900, and I don't know why my IntelliSense all of a sudden decided to, oh, there we go, okay, it's back. So I can still do text blue, and I have all my IntelliSense, which isn't working, but you get the idea. I can still do 900, and it'll still give me that little preview saying, okay, yeah, that's a valid class. But I can also come just and do this, text blue, done, and you can see the pigment changed a little bit there. So I've added these additional things. I can do text blue, text light, and text, I'm not going to go back, you can see the preview here hopefully, and text dark. So in addition to that gradient, I have now my defined classes, but it doesn't remove the ones that are there. So extend is good if I want to leave that whole Tailwind palette open, but I want to define some specific things for people to use. For example, we come in here again, you'll see things in ours, we tend not to use extend, and I'll explain why in a minute, but you'll see things in ours like border, press release, stuff like that, kind of tied more towards what that function of that thing is. And sometimes we'll redefine the same color 3 or 4 times just because it's easier contextually. Okay, well, this is a press release the quarterly report header, well, it's the same color, but I'll just define it twice because it's not a big deal, and that way I always know to use which one I want because it's got the right name. And if one does change, then we're already set up for it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have to override colors that are already defined? So Discord has a color called blurple. And famously, they're like, this is blurple. So anywhere you want to brand stuff with the Discord branding, which I'm guessing is not one of the Tailwind native colors.
I've never tried it.
Could you add blurple to the extends there?
So yeah, you could add it here. I'm not even sure what to guess it is. Let me see if it's in here. Blurple B, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't see it. It might be copyrighted.
But I mean, if you had like a nickname for your company's brand color, can you extend it with that nickname?
Absolutely. As long as you can get the RGB or the hash code color, you can any color you want. We have some where I can tell developers were frustrated, forgot to change color name before they check the code in. I get the PR, I'm like, oh, that can't get approved. You might want to take the F-bombs out of your code. Sorry, I don't make the rules. I just make the rules. So yes, you can put anything in here you want as far as that. And you can also do things in here. I don't have an example right now, but you can also do things like fonts as well, spacing. If you, for example, that W24, I think it was 16 rems. Well, we really want that to be 18 rems. You can come in here and redefine that as well. So any change to those classes you can make here in Extend. I have one more thing to show, but before we do into that, are there any questions?
You have standard or a set of classes.
So right now, there's no easy way in Tailwind to do that because I had that situation come up where I wanted every H1 to have this or that. There's ways you can kind of try to fake it out for things like that, but they're not always reliable. And sometimes they'll show up, sometimes they won't. They are working. Tailwind 4 will be out soon. In fact, they just open sourced their progress, and that is one. Because there's other things people have wanted to do. For example, one of the things we've wanted to do for a long time is success. Well, I really want to make a success that's specific to background, a success that's specific to foreground. Can't do that right now, but that is something that they're working on for 4 as well. So you can redefine things like classes, but when you get into things like tags, HTML tags, you can't really do that with Tailwind. What they suggest is create a class in here, which I think is a terrible idea. Class is called H1, and then do class name H1 in all your H1s, which is like, well, that's why? That's.
So the way you would do it is to make an H1 component.
Or yeah, that's another way you can do is make an H1 component. Even I'll admit that's a little kind of getting into yak shaving. But hey, if you like your yak shaven, knock yourself out. I don't have a preference, but anyway. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there any way to handle like multiple themes? Like usually what happens, the light variant and dark variant. So in that
So yeah, put a pin in that until the next. You'll still have the same question, but I'll be better able to answer it. Okay. Anyone else? You're all still awake, I hope. Great. Pub soon. Anyway, okay. So that's Extend, and that's great. But the thing is, I don't necessarily want to do this all the time. Like I mentioned, we don't actually use Extend that often because the problem is, okay, I'm giving you all these colors to use, but I'm sort of not taking away all the toys I don't want you to play with. And I know a lot of things about parent. I'm not a parent, but I understand it's about taking things away from children mostly to help them become well-adjusted. So we get into this idea of themes. And I'm going to comment Extend out here for a second. Hopefully I'll do this right. One thing I will say, and I think this is true in .NET, if for some reason you create a syntax error in this file, you'll have to restart your server because Tailwind is just like, I don't know, and it just freaks out, and it's kind of ugly. Hi, you didn't know this? Okay, so we don't really like Extend. Instead, we just use the theme block. And what I've done here is I've kind of done the same thing, except now it's just at this top level of theme. I've added a font family here, so I can make sure everybody's using the same font. I think there is another option, I think, I forget what it's called, for another type of font. We have one client who uses it. It's a chiropractic company, and their website's very shishy, whatever. But generally speaking, if you're going to do font, you need a sans and a serif font. Define them, you're good to go. I have my colors here as before. Now, if I go back to my page, And this is where I want to start talking about the code a little bit too. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Okay, so we haven't really improved much here yet, but if we do this, if we say we're going to use the components that were fixed, and I'll show you how we did that in a minute. See, it's just that easy to fix things in React. Okay, now we've got everything looking the same. Well, how do we do that? Okay, so let's go to the Tailwind config. Let's talk about that first. In the Tailwind config, we have this theme, and we've defined our slate and our gray and our blues and our font family. If I go into my components, and actually I want to close these. Like every good TV chef, I have the turkey already baked here in this folder called fixed. Okay. So I've made a few changes here, but and this is kind of where I talk about moving things into components. For one thing, if you look at this versus the other, it's unfixed component. Granted, we have kind of CSS class name bloat, right? And again, that's one of the knocks against Tailwind is, I mean, my code's full of CSS classes. This is ridiculous. What's going on? What we did is we pulled things out to components. So this is a lot cleaner, right? We agree? Okay. I do have some CSS still in here, but I've pulled everything out into these components that I put in here. This is basically that picture in a circle. And again, by pulling this out, I've done a couple things. First of all, I've made this more atomic, meaning it does one thing. Single responsibility principle. You've all heard that, right? Okay, great. This does one specific thing, and it focuses on that. And it only has one reason to change. It only needs one set of tests. And I've also pulled that Tailwind out so that it's in one place. So I'm not repeating it over and over again in my code. And it's more what I specifically want this to look like. So this is what I talked about before, that idea of bundling your styles with your component so that when you ship the component, it automatically just applies it for you. Or just divs with CSS or with Tailwind classes in them that just wrap other content just because we want to apply those effects to a bigger piece of code. In this case, we have the image. The other thing we did, again, name. This is exactly what I was just talking about. We're getting a name here. So in this case, for those of you who don't know React, we're passing a name in as text, and we're basically just dumping it out in this span. But this is a case of we're just shipping really a style. There's nothing functional in here, right? It doesn't do anything. It just shows a name, but it's applying that style. So we're making sure that everywhere that name gets used, that style is consistently applied. You know what it is? Title, same deal. We have a title, and we're just wrapping it in our text. Now, you'll notice in here, text blue, background slate. If we come back to our Tailwind config, we can see we have blue in here, we have slate defined in here. And before we had extend, that didn't really do much, because I could always just come in here and do text blue 900, right? Not a big deal. Go back to my page. Where's my blue? It's not there. The difference between extend and just the theme block is that if I put it in the theme block, it's going to override everything. Meaning that as soon as I created a rule in here for blue from I'm not getting the preview, so that's not a good sign. If I go back to the web page, yeah, no green. So this is where I talk about the design language. I can define in here, let me put this back the way it was. Okay. I can define what I want my developers to use when building this site. And more importantly, I can stop them from using things we don't want them to use. I can create that very specific language that keeps them on track with what they're building. So they can't use anything that's not defined in here, which is why a lot of times, and you should do, if you're gonna do this, trust me, do this right off the bat because you will forget that. Even black and white, I need to define those. Because as soon as I create a color section in here, any color in Tailwind is just like gone. We're not using it, we're only using the stuff you say. Same thing with fonts, which is why you always want to provide a backup font name, because any other font that would be available normally, gone as soon as I created this font family object. Same thing with spacing. If I create a spacing block and I put H24 in there, and I don't put any other spacing in there, They're just not there. So this is a way to be very prescriptive about how you apply styles, colors. This page all of a sudden. And it helps kind of just make it easier for developers because now we don't have to think, well, okay, this is supposed to be blue, but that kind of, you're looking at a Figma document and you're trying to figure out, well, blue's close, but I don't know. It's in here already. Just say blue, done, whatever. We have clients who give us like really goofy names. And then we, it's funny about Blue Mountain Ocean. Okay, sure, whatever. It's blue. Okay, fine. We can put them in here and we can have that control. Now, you talked about dark mode. I don't have an example for this. I'll put one in here before I give it to Dylan. But you can come in here and you can define colors, dark mode, colors, light mode, as many modes as you want. You're not restricted to dark and light. You can, whatever. We have one client that's international. They have a set of colors for one set of countries and another set of colors for another set of countries because cultural norms are different. And red and orange are great in countries, but some countries are like, ew, no.
Color blindness.
We do something. So color blindness we don't necessarily handle here. We usually leave that kind of open to some of the other tools that are kind of built into the browser. You could certainly do. But also, one thing we have found working with good designers take that into account, and they tend to build their designs in ways where it looks good, but it's also high contrast. So because I have friends who are colorblind, it's not that they can't see the colors, it's that they can't see the contrast. So creating those high contrasts is what helps them. It's not, they don't, it's like white text on a white background. This kind of helps them see it a little differently. So again, working with a great designer will already kind of build that in, but yeah, you could absolutely put that in there as well. But this is the way we use it. We don't even bother with extend. We basically just say, these are the styles you're going to use. Even if we don't have a style guide, we have a couple smaller clients who are like, whatever, we don't care. We have a couple canned themes. We'll show them, we'll say, hey, here are like the 6 themes we have. Pick one, and I think slap it in there and that's done. You have a question, I can tell.
With regard to the styles you set up in here, is it possible, do you have any kind of build steps that validate that?
So not necessarily build steps. I mean, so.
Specifically thinking when you're referring to contrast, so the American Disability Act
Right.
has ratios between colors, so it doesn't have to be yellow on black. It can be any color,
Right,
but they have to be a distance of contrast apart.
So yes and no. So Tailwind itself doesn't. It'll validate slate defined in here 8 times. It'll say, hey, what? But as far as like the actual colors and the blend, there's sites you can do that with. Forget. Sorry? Awk is one. There's one called Ally something, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I have them all in a.
So I was thinking
yeah.
about building and checking the Tailwind config rather
So
than
I don't know if there's any tool that would do that for Tailwind. And honestly, I'm spoiled. We've been working with a lot of really great designers. We haven't had to worry about that. But I think there was a site you mentioned. There are sites you can have look at your. I think Google Lighthouse will do this too. But it'll look at your site and evaluate it for disabilities. His question was: is there anything in build step or tool you could use to validate this file in terms of like color blindness or disability or high contrast, things like that? And the answer was no, not really. Your Lighthouse, that's what we use. But any other questions? Yeah.
So, is it just throughout the project, or can we create a configuration that is specific to certain section? Like
No, right now this is for the whole project.
yeah, because for like if you are creating a module that is dealing with the charts, etc., then we would like to have the more color freedom than rest of the other projects.
Right. So let me rephrase your question to make sure I understand this. So you might have like be using like a charting or visualization library. So we haven't used a ton of those. The ones we've used have basically kind of been, it's almost like they embed with their own inline styles. A lot of them, when they spit the chart out, they've got their own thing. They're probably not using Tailwind, so they probably don't care. They probably already have their own CSS in there. They have their own styles. So they're not even going through Tailwind. In fact, we just did a React Native project. It was all charts, which charts on a mobile device, fun. And again, we use Tailwind and we have a theme, but the charts weren't affected. Now we could inject this library, I forget what I think they used victory charts, I don't know. But we can inject colors in that we want to use, but if we didn't, it would just use its own colors. And because it doesn't really use Tailwind, it doesn't listen to our stuff anyway, it's just like, hey, that's fine, but I already have my CSS that ships with my chart.
Some clients and designers just want precise color.
Right.
They have to override the type different color.
Yeah, and we have that too with the charts. They wanted it to be in specific colors, and luckily with this, but that really comes down to the charting tool you're using. This one allowed us to say, hey, for this series, use this color, this series, use this color, and it automagically happened. Magic happens when the chart comes out. So, no problem.
Can you use CSS variables?
This is version 4. They're working. They got a lot of stuff coming for version 4 that's really cool. The big thing for version 4 is I've never had a speed issue with Tailwind that I've felt like, but apparently there are some very impatient people out there, I guess, I don't know. They're rewriting some of the build steps to be in Rust, which is supposed to make it like, I mean, like they're saying like an order of magnitude faster. I'm like, I mean, that's fine. My tests still take 5 minutes to run anyway, but super. Okay, go ahead. But no, there's a lot of really cool stuff coming in Tailwind 4, and they haven't even announced everything yet. So I'm kind of excited. Hopefully at the end of the summer. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, so just need to say it with performance.
Right.
So with frameworks like Tailwind, it being customizable normally means that performance might be affected. So does that in your experience happen?
So paradoxically, no, because what happens is, so this theme here I've defined. Yeah, Tailwind ships with tons of utility classes for every color, 10 shades of each, all that stuff. As soon as I create that color block, those all go away. They don't even get built. And only those colors I've defined. So instead of having, I don't know, a couple hundred color rules, I have, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 or 7, I can't, math's hard. But I have whatever's in that object. That's it, that's all that ships with it. And even if I don't have this, I mentioned one of the things Tailwind does as part of its build step is tree shaking. So it'll go through your code, and this can be, is anybody here using Storybook? So one of the things you will run into, and you'll hate this the first time you do it until you figure it out, and then you'll like, okay, bookmark this page so I don't forget, is one of the issues we had with Storybook was when we went to use it, none of our styles came over because the Storybook is a different build process. It tree shook all of the Tailwind classes out of it. So our Tailwind basically was empty. There's nothing in it. So all we'd have everything show up with Storybook. None of our styles are there. I mean, they're in the HTML, but they're not defined anywhere. So because what Tailwind does, it'll go through your code as it's building it, and it'll take its library and it'll say, everything you're not using, dump it. So if you're only using 12 styles, you know, Tailwind has thousands of styles, it'll say, well, he's only using these 12, everything else goes away. So actually the performance has never been a problem because of that. Now, again, the Storybook thing, you gotta mess with post CSS. I'll put a link in here. You'll do it once and then you'll be like, just copy paste this next time because this was a real nightmare. But anyway, but no, performance has never been an issue. That's why I laughed about the Rust thing, the build step. I can't imagine having a project that's using so many Tailwind classes where that's gonna make a huge difference. But there are people online who are just, if your code, if your CSS is like that this benefits you, you might have other problems you need to look at. But no, we've never had a performance issue with it. In fact, we had another project, client and system we used, style components, which is another JavaScript thing. I mean, okay, I'm okay with HTML and JavaScript, but when you start putting CSS and JavaScript, you've gone too far. And these things are just a nightmare. I think it's what React Native used. I think I referred to them as hot garbage about 20 minutes ago. We see a lot of performance problems with that because there is no tree shaking. You have the same thing you can find over and over and over again for every component, and it just bloats it. Tailwind, we try to convince them to Tailwind because, hey, we can shrink 40%, and they're like, no, it's fine. Okay, fine. But no, we haven't had any performance issues with Tailwind. In fact, it's faster than Bootstrap in some cases. The package size is definitely smaller. I kind of rambled there a bit, I apologize.
No.
I'm trying to fill time. Any other questions?
I love it. All right, cool. Big hand.
Well, I got a couple more slides on.
Oh, you got more? There's more.
There's more.
There's more.
There's a little bit more. Okay, so a couple things I want to talk about. Okay, just 2 more slides. So one of the things I usually get asked is about component libraries. I know .NET, I used to work for Telerik. How many of you Ignite? I used to be the Ignite guy. Or not Ignite, yeah, no, wait. Ignite was Infosys. God, it's been a while. I used to be the Kendo guy. Not the guy with the sword, because, I mean, look at me, come on. But I was the Kendo evangelist for a while. And so I know .NET developers, you guys really use a lot of component libraries, and those are big deals. For Tailwind, as far as component libraries, a lot of these are more kind of JavaScript focused, but you can use them in .NET applications. Flowbyte's probably the big one. They ship a lot of things. They're all Tailwind compliant. Daisy UI was hot for a minute, and now everybody's kind of forgotten about it. I don't know what happened, but whatever. We are using SASS. We just started using it. We're having great results with it. It's unlike other component libraries where you have to get the whole thing. Like Kendo, again. Hey, we only want this like date picker. Great, here's 5 megs to put in your application of all the other crap you don't want. Enjoy. Well, can we take that out? Nope, sorry, bye. SASS allows you just to install the specific components you want, which is super great if you're looking at your package size. I will put a link in here too. If anybody here, I am doing a talk later this month. It's a virtual talk on React Native. If anybody's interested, I'll put the slide deck in here as well. With that, that's it. If you have any questions afterwards, the top one's my personal email address. The other one's my work address, and I'm on Twitter. And this is the aforementioned book, which is, no, the most important part, my plugs. Well, it's okay. I was about to say it's old. Don't buy it, unless unless like a short table leg, and you need something to. It makes it. Well, Mother's Day just happened. It's a great Mother's Day gift, but I mean, my mom liked it, but.
And books like that used to be great for propping up your monitor, but now everyone's got laptop stands, so we don't need to do that anymore. So.
Yes.
Cool. All right, a massive thank you. Thank you, James.